Hi guys, so today's video is going to be my mid-year wrap-up. I'm going to give kind of a little bit of an overview of everything I've gotten around to up through this point of the year. I'm not going to go super in-depth about everything I read. I'm just going to let you know my feelings toward the books and whether or not I think you'd like it based off of your taste, a little bit of information about what the book's actually about. But if you want more information about any of the books that I'm talking about, I'll link all of the reviews and chats that I've done in the description bar down below. I think I've done reviews and chats for, if not all of them, then most of them. So if you want more information, those will be there. I'm going to start off with a book that I read toward the very beginning of the year, and that would be Wicked King by Holly Black. This is the sequel to Cruel Prince. Because it's a sequel and I don't want to give away spoilers, I'll give a little bit of information about the first one. This book follows a girl named Jude who was raised by Fae despite the fact that she is a human. And there are some very interesting family dynamics and relationships within this world. It is very much a reflection of the cruelty and the trickery of the Fae. I think all of that is kind of embedded into the story. So if you go into this looking for a cute, happy story with really sweet relationships, you are absolutely not going to get that. I know sometimes this is a book that people are frustrated by because they feel like it has what they consider to be a toxic relationship, and I think all of the relationships in the book are pretty morbid. That's kind of my take on it. These are beings that are not quite human, so there's a lot of backstabbing and just in general being unkind. I had read the first one last year and I thought it was pretty good. I definitely didn't feel like I enjoyed it maybe as much as a lot of other people, but I very much enjoyed the second one. I thought it was almost impossible to put down. I was intrigued right from the very beginning. I cared way more about what was happening, and there are some twists and turns that I wasn't expecting. So if you read the first one, you were like me and you thought, that was okay, then I would still suggest that you maybe check out the second one from your local library, because it really surprised me, and it's been a book that I've enjoyed so much that now I just can't wait for the third one. Next up would be Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobbs, the first book in what ends up being a very, very big story. She's written a lot of books in this world, and this very first one just kind of scratches the surface. It follows our main character named Fitz, who is the illegitimate son to a nobleman, and because of this, and despite the fact that he is just a child, he does have some claim to power, but he does not want any of that power. He could not care less. He's a kid, he doesn't really know what's going on, but he is kind of swept up into all of the politics, whether he likes it or not. He's very lonely. He definitely doesn't feel like he has any control over his own life. Robin Hobbs' writing style, in my opinion, definitely felt very reminiscent to classic fantasy. The prose are often very formal, and she puts a lot of care into everything. She has some very beautiful ways of describing the simplest of emotions and the simplest of things, and I really enjoyed that element of the story. I also felt like the way that she talks about the relationships that people can have with animals was done really beautifully. Overall, though, I personally found this story to be not quite to my personal tastes. I do want to add one more thing to that, though, and say that part of the reason it's not really for me is because our main character is a child, and I don't necessarily always want to follow children characters in adult fantasy, because then it feels like the child is somewhat soaking in everything that's going on around them, and then I kind of want to know what's going on around them. That kind of stuff seems more interesting to me, but the child is almost oblivious to what's happening, and that's just not my favorite. It's also a I'm telling you the story kind of story, because you get the impression that Fitz is older when he's telling you this story, and so it very much is the main character telling you what's happened. And when we have an older protagonist telling you of their younger self, it just to me feels like there's a tiny bit of a disconnect with the character, and I love being emotionally connected to the character. But again, this is all personal preference or my own takeaways. I still think a lot of people should check out this book if it sounds interesting, because a lot of people love it for a reason. Next up would be Lady Smoke by Laura Sebastian. This is the sequel to Ash Princess. It is the middle book to what will be a trilogy, and because again it's not the first book in the series, I'll give you a little bit of a synopsis of the first book. So Ash Princess follows our main character named Theodosia, who was the heir to a kingdom that was conquered, and she was kept alive so that anytime her people try to rebel or anytime they try to do anything in their own best interests and try to fight the oppression that the conquerors have put on them, Theodosia is publicly beaten, and that is supposed to kind of ease the tension within the kingdom and make the conquerors have a little bit more peace. It's definitely a very sad, very tragic premise. So we are meeting our character when she's kind of at her lowest point. She has nothing else she can lose. She has been injured so much, she's lost everything, and she kind of gets to a point where she figures, I've had enough. I am tired of being used against my own people, and I want to do something to stop this. So that is the setup for the story. There are definitely quite a few tropes in this story, but I still thoroughly enjoyed the first one. And the second one, the world opens up a little bit more, and some of the tropes in the first one get pushed aside. So I thought that was nice. I personally didn't mind the tropes in this one. There is a little bit of a love triangle. There is the heir to a conquered kingdom. That's not the most original. So there's these things that, you know, if you're looking for something that wows you and you've never seen done before, that's not this book. But it is highly entertaining, and I think out of all of the books I read last year, this first book, Ash Princess, I may have read faster than any other book, and I read the second one quite fast as well. It definitely has a hint of middle book syndrome because you're coming right off of the coattails of the first one, and you're also kind of trying to set up the third one. But overall, I thought it was a really enjoyable read. Definitely has a lot of stakes, a lot of twists and turns. There's a couple times I was a little bit frustrated with our main character, but overall I thought it was highly enjoyable. Next up would be Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. This is currently a standalone that is in the Cosmere, which is Sanderson's shared universe. I reread this book. I loved it even more the second time around. It follows two sisters, Ciri and Vivenna, and Ciri has always been very carefree, very happy-go-lucky because she is the youngest and she has no obligations in her royal family. Her sister, on the other hand, Vivenna, has been groomed since childhood to fulfill a marriage alliance with another kingdom that her kingdom personally despises. They think these people are heathens, that they do everything against their religious teachings, but in order to keep the kingdom safe and hopefully prevent war, she has to marry the god king of this other place. And when the day comes for the marriage alliance to be fulfilled, her father decides he can't do it. Vivenna is his favorite daughter, and so he sends Ciri in her stead. I personally feel, in typical Sanderson fashion, this book takes some tropes and flips them on their head. Some of the elements of the story are not the most original. We have an arranged marriage. We have two siblings within a royal family who kind of have their roles reversed. We have some things that, once again, they're not the most original. They're not going to blow your mind, but he does them in a way that I think is so much fun. This book does not have tons of action. If you're looking for a Sanderson book with a lot of action, I would say Mistborn's a great one. I would say Skyward 2 is a great one. This one is all about political intrigue. The magic system, though, I find to be absolutely fascinating as one of the most complex and interesting magic systems I've ever seen, and I absolutely love it. I think it is so original and cool, and I wish I could talk about it a little bit more, but I also want to let you kind of discover it for yourself because I just think it is so fun to see how the magic unfolds and how it plays into the story. Next up would be Kiss of Deception by Mary E. Pearson. This is the first book in a trilogy, and I found that this very first book was interesting and entertaining, and I actually really enjoyed the main character's role within the world. So the premise is that she is supposed to marry somebody to fulfill a marriage alliance, and last minute she bails and runs away and decides, I want to have a life like every other girl, and then she goes off to fulfill that wish of hers. And in doing so, she realizes she kind of caused a lot of stuff to happen and a lot of things went wrong, and there are two individuals sent after her. Well, actually, one individual sent after her, and this person is an assassin, and then another person of their own free will has come looking for her, and that would be the person she was supposed to marry. And you get the perspective of these two individuals, but you don't know which one was her betrothed and which one is the assassin. And the way that Mary E. Pearson does it is very fascinating, because sometimes you do know they are named characters, and so you get their names, but then when she doesn't want you to know which one is which, she calls it the assassin and then the prince. And the way that she does it, I thought was really interesting, and I can't imagine having to have tried to pull that off, because it would have been so difficult, I think. But she did a really good job of it. That said, I do think there is a tad bit of a downside in that premise, in that setup, because you don't really get that connected to either of those characters, because you don't always know which one you're reading about. So when certain things will happen from the point of view of the main character, you don't know if she is talking to the one that is the assassin or if she's talking to the one that's the prince. And when you get those perspectives, you can't help but think, I don't know which one it was that had that interaction with her, so I don't know which one I like. Or like, I know I don't like that one, but I don't know which one that is. And you will eventually find out, then you kind of get that in hindsight, but while it's happening, you don't really get that connection to them. Because there are two guys and a girl, a lot of people consider the relationship between these characters to be a love triangle. Some people would very passionately argue it's not a love triangle. Just depends on your takeaway when you read it, so I'm not going to tell you if it is or if it isn't. But what I will say is that I loved so much about this book except for the romance, and that's a big part of the book. And it's not that I didn't like it because it's a romance, because I actually really like a good romance in a fantasy story, is that I just legitimately didn't care about that part of the story. I liked the politics and the relationship the main character had with her best friend and with her brother. I thought all of that was really well done. I just didn't care about the romance, and it is a big part of the plot. I cared enough about the story, though, to pick up the second one, and I didn't finish the second one. It just, to me, while I heard that the main character has exponential growth throughout the trilogy, I found her at the beginning of the second one to be so annoying that I didn't want to keep reading. I may eventually someday go back and give this series another try, because I did enjoy the first one, but I just found her so obnoxious that I kind of threw in the towel, and I was like, I can't do it. Even if you do grow right now, it's just, you're a little too much for me. Next up, I feel a little bit strange saying this, but I did read this within these first 6 months of this year, and that would be Peace and Turmoil. Peace and Turmoil is the first book in an epic fantasy series. It follows a cast of characters, the main ones being the heirs to their given kingdoms, and they are somewhat intertwined through each other's political maneuverings. If you like a lot of politics in your epic fantasy, this is definitely got a lot of that. There is also a fair amount of action, and there is a unique magic system that involves colors and elements. And the way in which people use magic is that everybody has the ability to use magic. It definitely requires a lot of time and dedication to become good at it, but everybody has something within them called auroras, and the auroras are different colors, and each of the different colors represents different elements that can be used. It's definitely got a different kind of a magic system that plays a role in the fight scenes, it plays a role in the action, and then on top of all that, there's a ton of politicking. The next book that I got around to would be Crown of Feathers by Nikki Powell Preto. This is the first book in what will be a trilogy, and it follows this main character named Veronica, who has very much always wanted to be a Phoenix Rider. The Phoenix Riders were a group of individuals that were essentially wiped out because of some political happenings that occurred in the past. There is a lot of world building in the form of history throughout the book, which I think is really cool, especially for YA, because I haven't seen a ton of that. But getting back to our character, Veronica, she has always wanted her own phoenix. They are very rare. A lot of people cannot even find eggs for them, but that is her dream. And she ends up having an opportunity to maybe get a little closer to this dream when she finds out that there are some people that have formed a little bit of a resistance and have formed the Phoenix Riders again. But in order to kind of get into this group, she has to disguise herself as a boy. I already kind of mentioned the fact that there is a ton of history that is ingrained into the story, something I really, really loved seeing, and it's definitely something that makes me kind of want to go back and reread the book, especially with how the book ends. It ends with a little bit of a cliffhanger, so it's one of those stories that you feel like you're getting more than just the main story when you're reading it. You're also getting the story of the past, which is really, really cool. If you like lore in your stories, I think you'll really like it. If you like animal companions, I think you'll really like it as well. I really enjoyed that our main character, Veronica, is, while she's strong-willed, she's also incredibly sweet, and she's very caring. And I've just not seen too many characters like that anymore. As much as I love our kick-butt type characters, which I find we have those for men and women, I still appreciate the occasional cinnamon roll cookie of a character where they're just so sweet and you just want good things for them, and when bad things happen to them, you're like, leave them alone. Next up would be the First Era Mistborn trilogy. Oh, I can't even say it without getting emotional. So I am going to be putting up a very in-depth chat for the third one soon. It breaks my heart. Anyway, some of you may not know much about Mistborn, which that's weird if you've watched my videos before, because I basically always talk about it. But I'm sure you've heard about this story. It follows a kind of ragtag group of individuals who are fighting to take down what is known as the Final Empire. Back in the day, the person that all the prophecies said would save the world is not the person who succeeded. Instead, it was the Dark One. It was a person that was not the chosen one. And so now we are 1,000 years into that world. Things aren't looking so good. There is a group of people known as the Ska who are oppressed, and then there are noblemen who are the ones that have power. And this ragtag group of people are trying to take this out. They're trying to kind of take over the government so that they can create a better world. You can't really talk about Mistborn without talking about its magic system. That is something I think makes this stand apart and will always and forever be unique in that regard. The way the magic works is that people can ingest certain metals, and they have powers associated with those metals. Some people can only control one of the metals. Those individuals are known as Mistings, and then there are very rare people known as Mistborn who can utilize the powers from every one of the metals. This is definitely a very high stakes story. The first one I would say is the one that has a very good amount of action, as well as seeing a lot of character growth with our main characters, Vin and Kelsier, where the second one is a ton of politics and some war tactics and siege tactics type of stuff mixed in, which I think makes it absolutely engrossing. For some people, it is the most boring of the three because they're maybe not as interested in that. And then the third one is just, without giving away spoilers, it's kind of the highest stakes you could imagine, which you wouldn't think after reading the first two that it's even possible, but the third one, there's just so much going on and you just don't know how all the characters are going to make it out of it, but it is done so well. In my personal opinion, it is my favorite trilogy of all time. I highly recommend it. Next up, going in quite the different direction, we have an Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson. This is a standalone book, and it's fairly small and it's very sweet. It's a story that follows a girl who lives kind of on the outskirts of the Fae world, and so she's very much a part of Fae happenings. And in this particular town that she lives in, there are some people that have a lot of interactions with the Fae, and she is one of them because she has an amazing ability to draw and paint really incredibly well, which is something that the Fae themselves can't do. They basically can't do anything that involves the creation of something, and so they come to her and they commission her to do portraits of them. And when she ends up doing the portrait of a very important person, and she paints human sorrow in this person's portrait, it definitely impacts his reputation throughout the Fae world. They are not supposed to have these kinds of human weak emotions, and so he kind of sweeps her along into the Fae world and demands that she speaks of why she did this and denies that she actually sees this weakness in him. It's definitely a very interesting premise, and one that in some ways seems like, well, who cares that he had weakness drawn into them? Doesn't seem like a big deal, but it's just an indicator of how different the Fae are from the humans, how much they really admire power, and how this particular character is one that they don't really think is deserving of the power that they have. So I think that the author did a really great job of showing that the Fae are just so different from humans, and that creates a lot of humorous moments when our main character goes into the Fae world, because the two of them, her and this individual she painted, they have a lot of miscommunications or constantly wondering, why are you like this? This is stupid. Or why are you like this? That doesn't make any sense. And so I found those elements of the story to be quite funny. I thought the way the author described things was done beautifully. I thought her writing style and her descriptions was fantastic. The only drawback is I personally would have loved for this to have been a series and been opened up, because the politics of the world, I just felt like we could have dived into them so much more, and the different courts and everything. I just thought there was so much going on with those, and we only got a really tiny amount of that. But overall, if you are looking for a cute, kind of a romantic love story, sweet sort of fae story, that is, I would say, what this primarily is. Next up, we have some of the Witcher series by Andrzej Sapkowski. I am also, along with the Cosmere books, rereading the Witcher series, and I've really been enjoying my reread. There are definitely some elements of Sapkowski's writing that are very different. For those that don't know, these were originally published in Polish, and so there's just some things that are different as far as from what I've been told by people who actually are Polish. There are some elements of his writing that are considered good elements as far as what is considered good in Poland, but maybe is something that we don't really use much, or maybe we don't personally like. A very small example would be sometimes Sapkowski has very long sentences, and we would probably consider them run-on sentences, but apparently that is something that is considered good writing. And it's not that they're written poorly, it's just different. So just know with the Witcher series, that is something maybe to look out for. It's a very different means of writing. The story itself follows a monster hunter named Geralt of Rivia, and it's about him and how his life and his destiny is intertwined with this young girl named Ciri. I absolutely love the relationship between Geralt and Ciri, as well as the relationship between Ciri and an individual, a sorceress named Yennefer. How all of these characters are tied together, I really love. There is a lot of folklore inspiration in these stories, but just know that if you're ever going to pick these up, they are quite grim, they are quite dark, and it's rooted in a world that is currently ravaged by war. None of our main characters are necessarily involved in the war, so sometimes you will feel a bit of a disconnection, and you may not really quite understand what's going on with the politics, because our characters aren't really involved with the politics much, but they affect their lives. So it's one of those things where, unfortunately, war is a terrible thing, and these people are caught up in the middle of it, but it sets the background up to be very dark at times. Next up, we have Ever the Hunted by Erin Summerall. This is a story that follows a girl who, at the very beginning of the book, her name is Britta, and she is mourning the death of her father, and she is assigned to track down her father's murderer, who may or may not be the person that she kind of fell in love with and was her childhood best friend growing up. I personally really enjoyed the tracking elements of the story, and as far as the politics go, we get some information about the tension between the various different kingdoms, but we don't get a ton. I did only read the first book so far. I plan on reading more to see how much more that plays into it, but as of right now, I would say if you like politics in your fantasy stories, you're not going to get a ton of that in this one. Every time I talk about this book, I categorize it as romance adventure, which I stand by. I very much think that's what it is, but I can't really talk about it too much without giving away spoilers. But if you like a good amount of romance in your fantasy adventure stories, I think you would probably really enjoy this one. Next up would be Soul of the Sword by Julie Kagawa. This is a Japanese-inspired fantasy, and this particular book is the second in the series, with the first one being Shadow of the Fox. The story follows two main characters, Yumeko and Tatsumi. Yumeko is part shapeshifter fox, part human, and she's very sweet, very naive, but also a little bit of a trickster, where Tatsumi has been raised by the Shadow Clan. He's very rigid, sort of cold, and basically, like feelings are bad kind of a character. And these two individuals get thrust on an adventure with one another. It is very much a traveling story, and I personally found the differences between their personalities made for a very, very fun traveling story. The story definitely feels very episodic in the first one, which I found really fun and really enjoyable, and I think that if you are a fan of short stories and you like traveling stories, that you'll like this one because of the fact that it always feels like you're getting one episode of a TV show, and then you get to the next part that feels like the next episode, but there's one major arc going on throughout the entirety of the story. The second one is not necessarily formatted the same. I liked the first one more, partly because of how it was set up, and then the other reason is a spoiler that I can't get into. But just know that if you are interested in picking up the story, or if you've read the first one and you're wanting to pick up the second, it's not that it goes down in quality. There are just some elements of it that made me enjoy the first one more, but both of them I would say so far have been very enjoyable, and I can't wait for the third one, the conclusion. The last book on this list would be Descendant of the Crane by Joan He. This was such an interesting read for me because it took me so long to get into this story, and then once I did, I didn't want to put it down, and then when I finished it, I ended up loving it. So if you pick up this book, just know it's going to throw you into the middle of the story, or at least it feels like the middle of a world. You don't really get this unfolding of everything gradually sort of beginning. You kind of just are slammed right dab in the middle of it, and it starts with the main character knowing that her father is dead and that somebody murdered him, and she goes to some unusual means to try and help her figure out who the murderer is and set her on the right path. She also happens to be the heir to the throne, so when her father died, she is having to now become queen. She's very young, she's having to navigate politics that she wasn't expecting, and there is a ton of tension within her kingdom. So what starts off as what you expect to be a murder mystery ends up becoming so much more than that. If you like lots of action in your stories, this is not really the book for that. There isn't tons of fighting, and there isn't a lot of battles or anything like that, so it's not that kind of a fantasy story, but there's definitely a lot of politics. There's a little bit of a mystery because you have the whodunit situation as far as who murdered her father. There is so much going on with the kingdom itself. There's so much tension there, and the reasons for it has to do with the history of the story, which takes a while for you to really understand. But once you do, you realize how broken this kingdom is and how difficult our main character's position is, and she's realizing how difficult her position is. And on top of that, there is tons of familial relationships in the story. There's just so much packed into this book, and because of that, like I said, it takes a while to get into. But once you get into it, hopefully you guys will enjoy it too, because it's been one of my favorite reads of the year. Anyway, that's it finally for all the books that I've gotten around to and completed so far this year. I do have some others that I haven't quite finished yet, but I have reviews and chats up for those soon. Some of those would be Percy Jackson, Liza Lockamora, The Blade Itself, Elantris, so be on the lookout for those if you feel like chatting about those with me. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. Let me know what your favorite and least favorite books have been of the year so far, and I'll see you all later. Bye.